Hi, well, good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Bernardes. I am Program Manager here at the Science and Technology Policy Fellowships here at AAAS. And so I am joined today by Eric Breckenfeld and Diane Hannanen. But first, I want to go over or give you a brief overview of the fellowships. And then after that, we're going to turn it over to our panelists so they can talk about their experiences. So the live chats are an opportunity for us to learn more about the fellowships, as mentioned, the science policy interface, explore the different placement opportunities for STPF, find out where or how the fellowship transforms your career, and then to ask fellow and alumni questions that you have. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the comment section. And so that way we can definitely get your questions answered. So the fellowships is a year-long immersive policy experience. Fellows represent a broad range of career stages: early career, mid-career, senior career, and they also represent different disciplinary backgrounds. We have engineers, social sciences, and also health and medical sciences. The fellowship is a professional development opportunity to bring your STEM experience into the policy and gain a stronger understanding of how the federal government works, how policy affects science. It's also an opportunity for you to build a large network of fellows, alumni, agency administrators, and policy thought leaders. But what the fellowship is not, it is not a postdoc, and it is not a research experience. We have fellowships offered in 3 branches of the government: in the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Our executive branch fellowships are our largest, where we place about 150 fellows into to our executive branch agency. Followed by the legislative branch fellowships. AAAS sponsors 2 congressional fellows, but the partner societies or partner with scientific and engineering societies who sponsor fellows who go onto House and Senate committees on Capitol Hill. Our judicial fellowship is at the Federal Judiciary Center. We, or AAAS, sponsors 1 judicial fellow per year, and it is, and the FJC is the research and education agency for the judicial branch. When you apply to the fellowships, if interested, you can apply to two fellowships, the executive or legislative or judicial. And so you'll just be asked which fellowship you're interested in applying to. And we just ask that you write a separate personal statement, as well as consider different references for each application. But you can learn more about the fellowships and the different program areas by clicking Become a Fellow link in the AAAS website, on the AAAS website. So eligibility requirements are: you must be a U.S. citizen holding a doctoral degree in science or in engineering. You can have a master's degree in engineering, but you also have to have 3 years post-engineering, 3 years professional experience post earning your degree. So the application cycle begins today, yes, August 1st. And the application deadline is November 1st. So August 1st, which is today, opens up the fellowship for the 2019-20 fellowship year or fellowship cycle. And the cycle begins September 1 and concludes August 31st of the following year. It is a full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. and all host office placements in Washington, D.C. And again, all of these details are on our website. So let me turn it over to or introduce Eric and Diane Eric was a 2016 to 18 Executive Branch Fellow at the National Nanotechnology Coordination Office. He is now with the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, also known as DARPA, in the Microsystems Technology Office, where he works in the field of micro and nano electronics. He holds a PhD in material science and engineering from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Then we have Diane Hanneman, who was a 2006 to 2007 Executive Branch Fellow at National Institutes of Health. After, from 2007 to 2009, she was an Executive Branch Fellow at the Department of State. She is currently the Director of Academic Programs at the Institute of Integrative Health in Baltimore. And Diane holds a PhD in molecular biophysics and biochemistry from Yale University. So thank you both for joining us. Again, I just want you to, if you have any questions, please feel free to type in your questions in the comment section or in the comments section. So today's conversation, I'd like to provide you with a bit of a structure of how we're going to lead the conversation. We're going to talk a little bit, very briefly, about application and what it was like for Diane and for Eric to, apply to the fellowships, what they placed in their application, et cetera. Followed by talking briefly about their work that they've completed within their fellowship, and then getting into the meat and potatoes of the conversation of, life after the fellowship. So to kick things off, and then I'll have Eric to begin this to answer first. In your pre-fellowship career stage, why did you decide to apply to the fellowships?
Yeah, so before I did the fellowship, I actually had already been in Washington, D.C. So I came here immediately after grad school to do a two-year postdoc at the Naval Research Laboratory. And I figured that since I was in D.C., I should be looking for opportunities to kind of leverage my technical expertise in a way that, maybe there were some volunteer opportunities or some other ways to kind of engage with the broader community. And just through those searches, that's how I found out about the AAAS Fellows Program, as I was sort of searching for ways to expand beyond just the bench work that I was doing as a postdoc. And as I began to read more, I think I found out about it probably a year before I intended to apply. And as I read more about it, it very sort of accurately described what I was kind of beginning to realize I was interested in as the next stage of my career. So I was very much interested in moving beyond the bench work, the sort of narrow bench work that I was doing, which, while very, very interesting, was sort of limited in its connections to even similar fields, or sort of siloed, as they say. And I was very interested in exploring the options beyond that. I had already kind of identified that I didn't necessarily want to go immediately or perhaps ever into academia. And so this seemed to be a very good step to explore many options without limiting any potential pathways forward, I guess, in brief.
Diane?
Well, thank you, Cynthia. Very similar to Eric, essentially working in the laboratory. I was a graduate student at the time, and I, as we do the basic science, or at least that's what I was involved in. I was always driven by the question of how do we translate this information for society, particularly to create changes in health. And I found out about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, and it was a perfect fit because it was essentially a way that a scientist could come into Washington, D.C., the best way really to get into Washington, D.C. as a scientist and become involved in government where you can create change. So I was, as soon as I found out about it, I was just really focused on doing thinking about the application. And I was thrilled. I mean, to ultimately get the fellowship. But for me, it was a natural fit. If you want to translate science for society and you enjoy taking the difficult kind of scientific lingo and translating it so that someone can go, oh, that's really important, and that informs a decision, then the fellowship is the perfect place to be.
Got it. Thank you. Well, question for the viewers, can you all see, or is the video working for you all? Please feel free to type in yes, no in the comment section below, because we're sort of getting some technical feedback. But other than that, we're just going to continue on with the conversation. And so, you know, Diane, you mentioned application, you know, you were focused, actually both of you focused on the application. So if you guys can remember that time that you applied, you know, what do you think made a good application, or what do you think you put into your application that stood out? And so I'll turn it over to Diane so she can answer that.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. I think the big difference was really talking about how I was already thinking about policy or thinking about science from a community perspective. So I included activities that were either, I put together, there was a seminar that I put together while I was in graduate school to explain liver disease and research in liver disease for the public. I was involved in, I did some of the Capitol Hill days where I actually came to Washington, D.C. And I was able to essentially, I think, demonstrate that this was a long-term interest. I think one of the key things that you want to accomplish in your application is A, come across as who you are, be very authentic, and convey that you've really thought about what this opportunity will mean for you, and show some ways that you've demonstrated your interest, whether it's volunteering in your community, again, putting together a seminar at the university, whatever you've done outside of the laboratory. Time has changed a lot since I applied over a decade ago, which is frightening to think about. Now with social media and people, you know, start their own organizations even for different activities. There's a lot of different things you can do to begin to get involved in what you might consider the policy world or social community science world. And I think that's what really distinguishes an application from the rest. I think it's a key element.
Thanks, Eric. You want to add anything?
Yeah, fully agree. And you know, I'll just add that before the AAAS fellowship, I hadn't done anything that had anything to do with, you know, student government or anything like that. Not that that's not a good part of your application, but I hadn't shown any formal government interest in my extracurriculars. And so, sort of as was just said, what I looked for was ways to find, you know, connections to the sort of extracurriculars that I had done, and how do you connect that to what they're looking for in the application. And so just as an example, when I was in grad school, I worked with some of my friends who were in either the local design community and who also were very much involved with local maker spaces with like 3D printers and laser cutters and these sorts of things. Cool. And so what we did was we started a sort of a kind of a community program that was a 9-month board game design competition where we tried to sort of teach people how to use the 3D printers and also get kind of design advice from the, you know, design students at the college and these sorts of things. Because finding ways to share, you know, sort of the maker technology was something I was very personally interested in. And so what I talked about for part of my application was that, you know, this was an area where I said, how do we get, we have this really interesting technology that has been developed, and it is, in my view, underutilized by the community, even in those areas where it's free, because a lot of these makerspaces offer it free to the community, or you can even get it at libraries sometimes. So how do we encourage the community to participate in these things, or how do we get them to even know about the resources that are out there? And that's a very that's certainly something that the government thinks about, and getting people engaged with these sorts of things. And so that's just an example from what my background was and how I found a way to make it relevant. But I think that if you've been active in organizing things or any kind of outreach that you've done, it is relevant. And so, I find a way to include it and sort of weave it into your personal narrative, I guess I would say.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about once you were in the fellowship, or you were your placement. What were your responsibilities? Well, I'll begin generally speaking. What were some of your responsibilities? So, was it in alignment with what you had written in your application? So, last person to speak. So Eric.
Yeah, no, not at all. My responsibilities were, so I ended up getting placed at the National Nanotechnology Coordination Office, which runs what's called the National Nanotechnology Initiative, which is a White House initiative to do more nanotechnology. Like, they didn't really know what they wanted to do back in the year 2000 when it was created, but basically the idea was do more nanotechnology and do it better. And so what our office does, or it was our office, it's not my office anymore, but my office at the time, what we did was coordinate any kind of nanotechnology research or utilization or regulation that happened within the executive agencies. So that was, at the time I left, we had just added the 21st executive agency. The Department of Justice wants to start using carbon nanotubes in their body armor. So they had just joined and started giving a little bit of money to our office to help kind of harmonize research efforts in a very nebulous way. And that was very close to my technical background, but not much what I talked about in my application. I sort of talked about STEM education, and I talked about, kind of the like science communication, factors that I cared about. And just serendipitously, I ended up placed in an office that was a lot more of a closer fit to my technical background than to my sort of outreach aspirations, even as much as I still was, afforded time to do those things, but it wasn't what I talked about in my application at all. And from the other fellows I know, it's all over the place. Sometimes you just talk to an office that whatever they're doing, you'd never thought about that before. And it's really interesting to you, and it has some really, clever or interesting fit with your background or what you're interested in that you never thought of. The government does so many things that you have no idea about, before you sort of dip your toe in, that just learning and talking to all the different program managers at the different agencies, it's if you have some one specific thing that you're here to do, I don't want to say you can't do that, but I would definitely say, keep an open mind about the things you're interested in, because there's so much there that you don't even know about yet.
Diane?
Well, I couldn't agree with Eric more. Absolutely. It's actually a delightful space that you move into, because, even that interview week, the people that you meet and you learn about all the different things that are happening and the opportunities that are available, it's astounding. You exit that week a different person than when you come in. So it's really being open to what opportunities are available and that resonate with you. So from my perspective, I had two different fellowship experiences. The first one at the NIH, and ironically, I was working on the nanotechnology task force through the Office of Director at NIH. So we had an internal, it was coordinating through all of the 27 institutes and centers, or those that were engaged in nanoscience, particularly the National Cancer Institute. They were the co-chairs, and coordinating their activities and positions as we worked within the interagency group, which Eric's talking about. The coordinating office was essentially the hub that I believe was set up by Congress.
Yes, it was.
To get the cross-agency coordination. So I had a wonderful opportunity to be involved in the interagency dialogue around environmental health and safety concerns and potential regulations for nanomaterials. So that experience set me up really well when I ended up going for my second year to the Department of State in the East Asia Pacific Bureau, where
I'm going to pause. Oh, sorry. I wanted to pause a little bit and ask the audience members, what brings them into the live chat today. But you guys also mentioned, or you touched on, sort of your responsibilities as a fellow. But I wanted to know, how was that transition? You were, in a completely different space prior to coming to the fellowships. And so now here you are transitioning into the government. And I'm sorry I cut you off, Diane, and I definitely want you to continue. And so I wanted to know, how was that transition for you? Because you transitioned into NIH and then you transitioned into State Department. And so, and then Eric, sort of, trying to figure out, a different step in your career. Just talk a little briefly about your transition. And folks online, please share your thoughts in regards to what brings you to the to our chat today. So go ahead, Diane.
Well, my transition, I had worked prior to actually going to graduate school. I had a marketing communications career. So the office environment was a smooth transition for me. The biggest adjustment, though, is just learning the government system, because it's a whole machine that's different than anything else. So it's different than just a laboratory, and it's different than the private sector. It's just a large enterprise that you have to learn how to navigate, and where the power lies and what the protocols are. And I will say, AAAS does a wonderful job in their orientation, I think, to really make people aware of what the environment's going to be like going in there, as well as the office did. That's why you come in as a fellow. You're working within an office, and they bring you up to speed pretty quickly. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, your brain's just, for me, it was just a lot of new activity, and I really soaked it up.
Yeah, totally agree. Pay attention during interview week. For sure. I'm getting like feedback on the mic. Pay attention during interview week. It's 2 weeks of everything you didn't know about how the government works that you probably learned in civics class in high school. For 7 hours a day. Definitely pay attention. It's very, very useful. I came straight from a laboratory setting after having gone, straight up through undergrad and grad school. So I'd never been in an office setting. I didn't know all the rules for how you're allowed to interface between different organizations, and, pay attention to those sorts of things, because in a university setting, you can kind of do whatever you want, and that is not how the government works. And I'm not trying to scare you. People do get in trouble for interfacing in ways they're not allowed to. Your coworkers will be very knowledgeable about those sorts of rules, and you're not expected to jump in and be an expert at navigating the different, ways that you're supposed to report on things, and no one expects that. I would say my transition, since I had not been in an office setting before, I would say it went relatively smoothly, but it probably took me, a few months before I was really moving forward at a pace that I wanted to, and really knew what our roles and responsibilities were, and kind of what was expected of me. I broke a clock on the very first day that I worked in my office. I knocked it off the wall, and it got glass everywhere. So that was my initial transition into my office. It could have been smoother, but the office I was in had taken a lot of fellows before, and you will find that in some offices, but not in all of them. And going off of accounts that I've heard from other fellows I know, some offices are very, very good at transitioning their fellows. They know what to expect. They know that many of us come from a research, straight off the bench, or from many years in industry, or these sorts of things. And they're practiced at kind of getting you up to speed. Others are sometimes newer at taking fellows, and that relationship can be rockier to start with, but for the most part, everybody gets there within the first, 6 months at the most, where you've transitioned, you finally know what you're doing, you have all your programs that you're in charge of or that you help with, and you can really start moving forward, and probably 6 months in, starting to think about what your next steps might be, for what you're interested in, especially if you're on the congressional side. But, I would say that for the most part, your coworkers and office directors are very good at making sure that transition is smooth.
Yeah.
So so you talked briefly about your fellowships, and audience members, what disciplines are you guys representing today? So that way we can get, a feel of, our audience members and who we're talking to. So, feel free to comment in the section, what disciplines you're representing. But to you two, oh no, I just lost train of thought. But as oh my goodness, I really just lost train of thought in sharing with you all, in the comments. But we talked briefly about your fellowships. And so, now as it was your second year, or whether it was the ending, as your fellowship was ending or concluding, how was the application process like? Was there an application in terms of, what your next steps were? How was that for you, and how did the fellowship prepare you for applying to those positions for after the fellowship? So yeah. I believe, go ahead.
So
physics, yay.
So the fellowship, I'll jump into first saying how it prepared me for doing my next job, which is that it's almost exactly the same, except for a different agency. So that was very easy. What I did before was manage programs in micro and nano electronics, and now that's still what I do, but I do it on the defense side instead of sort of nebulously in the middle of everything. For the application, I did not apply for this job straight away. When you are a fellow, there is a careers listserv where opportunities get posted to, just sort of as people come across them. And I don't know, probably maybe after like 4 months, they put all the new fellows on that listserv, something like that. And so I had sat for, I don't know, probably a year, and I hadn't seen a single job go across that I was interested in. Just because there's so many fields and levels of experience, and I'm sure there were lots of jobs that people were interested in, but none that really fit my background. And then one suddenly in September came across, and I said, oh yeah, this looks interesting. So I just emailed the person that had sent it out, and within a month and a half, they sent me an offer, and then I took it and very abruptly ended my fellowship. During the second year, I very abruptly ended during the second year, not during the first one. They're very clear about what they do, what they like you to do and what they don't like you to do. And so, just sort of being around all of the things going on, knowing, meeting so many different people, and going to networking events, and knowing people through the listserv, and there are just so many possible ways for whatever that next job you're going to get is going to find you. That's not to say that you don't have to be proactive about it, but it's very hard to describe one specific way that people move on to their next thing, or what you should even be looking for. But you should be thinking about, after you've sort of got on your feet in your new job, you should be thinking about that next thing that you might be interested in. And maybe it's still in your office. Excuse me, maybe it's in a different office. Maybe it comes across the list server. It's just something that you hear about at a networking event. There are so many different ways. But I would say that's the nice thing about the fellowship, is that it sort of almost forces you to interact with so many things that would have been outside your normal comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Diane?
Yeah, I was fortunate to be hired by the office, my host office at the State Department. So that was how I transitioned directly out of the fellowship. But I think what I'd like to say is that the fellowship is the placement is what we all think about for the fellowship, but wow, the fellowship is so much more. There's all of the professional development programming that AAAS provides, plus you have your entire cohort of, which I think is 200 plus people now, that you become an immediate network, and you learn so much just from the friends and colleagues that you have in that cohort. And then you have all of Washington, D.C. at your disposal for the fellowship. And so the world is your oyster, and AAAS fellows are well known around the city. So you can be doing informational interviews, you can be going to networking events, you can go to seminars, you can just join your local biking club and meet people in the city. Really think of, it's an opportunity for you to really explore your interests in this whole new realm. And so the placement is one place you will absolutely get experience that is transferable for a government position. It's also transferable. I've seen people go on, some return back to academia, and then they end up leading, government relations committees and activities. They go to organizations. There's a lot of different opportunities afterwards that your fellowship placement experience is going to set you up for. But it's really the entire package of the fellowship that gives you the latitude to really just do self-discovery and find stuff that you didn't even know about until you got to the city. And because most people in Washington, D.C. come from elsewhere, I have found that it's a city that it's really easy to meet people because we're all from somewhere else, most of us.
Got it. Yeah. Was networking hard for you guys? Like coming from, academia? No, networking wasn't. Okay.
Well, go ahead. You go first.
Oh, I was just going to say, I remember it was, I think it was during the 2-week orientation, I made a joke with the people that were in my cohort that were immediately becoming really good friends. And I said, you know what? I think AAAS is conducting a social science experiment here. They have basically recruited scientists and engineers and clinicians that have a gift for gab and that enjoy other people. And they're putting us all together to see what happens. So it's a really, it's just a great group of people. And so just starting with the fellowship group, networking is just a natural thing. That word carries so much, it sounds icky to say network. It's really just meeting people that align with your interests and, connecting with them. And for a professional relationship, you may just be able to have an informational interview, or they may just let you know about something that is of personal interest to you. So networking is kind of a core activity in Washington, D.C., but it's not icky like it sounds. It's actually a lot of fun and should be personally driven by your interests.
Yeah, fully agree. And I would say, you will be in a close relationship with the people you go, you go through orientation with, right? The whole point of orientation is for people to ask you what your background is and where you're going, and for you to ask that of them. And you're not a jerk, or you're not pretentious by opening up with, I have a PhD and blah, blah, blah. That wouldn't be acceptable if you were just going to some bar. That's a weird way to introduce yourself. But that's the whole point of the orientation, is to meet meeting your class of fellows could not be easier. Now, I would say my advice is to, as was just mentioned, this is DC. Don't only go to fellows events also. Go to other events. There have been weeks where I've gone to a happy hour for networking every single day of the week. Don't do that for a month. Do not do that for a month. But you can do that for a week and you can be fine. You will be exhausted. And, don't do it for a month. But I highly recommend it. Just, think of the different communities that you want to be in. They have networking events every week. I would also say that your networking in DC is also just so easy, because your job is to go to, go to a bar at 7 where there's going to be a bunch of professionals meeting and talk about the things you're interested in, and listen to them talk about the things that they're interested in. And that's it. and if you leave and you didn't even get their contact information, but all you had was a really interesting conversation, that's not a loss either. And so networking in DC is, you do have to put yourself out there. A lot of the engineers and scientists who come into the fellowship probably are a little more capable of being extroverted. I can be extroverted for 2 hours, unless maybe at a happy hour, 3 hours. But DC is a great town because there's so many of us who are like that and who go to these events to talk about, these sorts of things and to talk about opportunities. And it really is an easy town to network in and have it not be like weird and slimy.
So we talk about networking, and thank you for your responses, especially in talking about orientation, where you get to meet a whole group of fellows. And so, I received a question from a viewer, and so it's in regards to career stages. Eric, you early career stage, and Diane, you were in your mid-career stage. So the question that the viewer asks is, he's interested in a sabbatical opportunity from his faculty position, and can you discuss how this enhances a faculty career? And so So Diane, I guess I'm turning this over to you. If you knew, or actually both, if you knew anyone in the in faculty who has transitioned into the fellowship, and then also, I guess this question is for Diane as well. Can you talk about, how was it? Not necessarily networking with, the other fellows, but in terms of transitioning from, your career to a fellowship and then going, back out into sort of a different career trajectory, sort of. So I asked you a lot of questions, Diane, but so faculty position, go ahead.
Yeah, I had, I've known several people that took leave or a sabbatical from their faculty position to do the fellowship. Both, let's see, the two people that I'm still in touch with, they enjoyed the fellowship so much that they've stayed here in DC. One, I think, is still technically on leave from her university, but the other got a fabulous job with the Science and Technology Policy Institute, which is essentially a non-government advisory office that advises the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She was so I think everyone, it's hard to classify. I would steer away from saying these are the experiences of these people, so this is predictive of what you might experience. Because one thing across the board is everybody's story and path is different and unique. I think coming to Washington, D.C. for a faculty sabbatical would be a wonderful opportunity if you're interested in bringing back to your university, again, a perspective about how scientists can engage with policymakers, or scientists can engage with the public to inform evidence-based policy. If that's your interest, I think it's an outstanding sabbatical opportunity because you can add a new layer to your university academic work. And then, if you're thinking beyond the university, it opens up all sorts of avenues, being able to wear both the research hat and having had experience in Washington, D.C. I think it's a tremendous combination.
Yeah, there are a number of fellows who I know who have come on sabbaticals, and I would say they probably fall into three categories, sort of what their life looks like post-fellowship. The first and the simplest probably is academics who go back into academia knowing a lot more about what the government wants out of your research. Since probably, I think, David, who asked the question, I think you said you were in aerospace. So much of your money comes from the government. And in my narrow experience, there are so many professors who fundamentally don't understand, even when it's written in BAAs, what the government's trying to get out of you, what information we want you to give us so that we can give you more money. And so just knowing, having a sort of an inside view of that process helps enormously. The second category is those who go back into an academic setting, but in some slightly different capacity, some kind of, you know, liaison or with some broadened scope or something like that. And then the third is those who just stay in DC because they enjoy it so much. So, you know, from that perspective, maybe it can be a little bit dangerous doing a sabbatical, but kind of in a good way, because it shows you other interesting things that you could be doing, and some people do seem to choose those. So, you know, I would say probably you know, almost always a positive, but it definitely has you know, changed some career trajectories in ways that I think people didn't expect it to.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. We have another question, and viewers, please bring in your questions. Another question asks, who are the best people to write letters of recommendation?
Yeah, that's a question that you grapple with for, I don't know, when I applied, the application process started in May, I think. So that was like a question that consumed my entire summer of like, who are the best, you know, who are the optimum people? So I think, how many they have you? Like three letters, I think. So definitely one who's going to speak to your specific, you know, professional kind of academic-y accomplishments. So since I had just graduated, that was my PhD advisor. But so one of those, but probably not three of those. So I think I had done some consulting work on the side when I was in grad school. So I had one of my managers for that consulting company give me a letter of recommendation, basically just to show that you are, you know, you have a broad sort of repertoire of interests and skills, and you're not just a scientist. You've shown that you want to do, you know, maybe it's someone you did outreach with, maybe it's another person who was in whatever kind of community organizing thing you were involved in, but, you know, people who are credible, obviously first they have to be people who are credible, and who can speak to your broad kind of resume of things that you've done and are interested in, and your accomplishments.
Diane, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You want to mix it up a bit. I mean, you want to have someone who speaks to your work as a scientist. And just a note on that, I had a very enthusiastic PI who was very supportive of me doing this work, but he admittedly up front was like, I'm not exactly sure what a policy fellowship is. So I actually gave him, you know, just kind of an outline and pointers of what the fellowship was about. I obviously sent him the link so he could read about it, but just kind of told him I'm applying for, at that point, the divisions were a little bit different. But for example, if you say, okay, I'm applying to the executive branch fellowship and the congressional fellowship, maybe giving your letter writers just you know, a couple sentences on why you're interested in each different type of fellowship, because I believe, at least it was in my day, they had to submit, I think, letters for each program that I was applying to. So that way they were able to speak to why Diane would be a nice fit for the congressional fellowship, why Diane would be a nice fit for the executive branch. So I kind of went above and beyond, but I think the people who were writing the letters, particularly my graduate student PI, or grad school PI, really appreciated that. And then when he read it, he was like, oh my gosh, you'd be great for this, Diane. So he knew exactly what to write. I'm not saying I fed it to him, but he had a perspective of me in that role besides just Diane in the laboratory. And then, yeah, just thinking outside, I had, because I was working as a graduate school fellow, doing seminars for the science community. So I had the director of that program write, and then I can't remember who the third person was. But again, it was thinking, I think I may have, because I had worked with the American Lung Association on that event, I think I maybe asked them to write about their engagement with me. I don't remember, but you want to mix it up and so that the selection committee gets kind of a rounded perspective of your experiences and people's work with you.
So audience members, trying to get you guys to participate with us, what are some of your policy interests? So please jot down your policy interest in the comments. And so what is one of the most invaluable or valuable things that you've learned through the fellowship? So, Eric.
What's that? Sorry, I was reading chat from some other questions. Say the whole question again.
I will say the whole question again. What is the, what would you say are 3 things that you learned from the fellowship or that were invaluable through you going through?
Yeah, so the first thing that I learned that I remembered, oh, I need to know this forever, is how the appropriations process works in Congress. You learn that during orientation week, and I thought this is a good one to remember, especially since it's whatever agencies if you're on the congressional side, you'll care about it a lot. If you're on the executive side, you'll care about it every time your budget's about to be set, which will determine if your office gets to keep existing and all sorts of other things. And so just that sort of lesson in civics, very important. The second thing, since I had gone into an office that contained within its sort of, responsibilities, my background and expertise, what I learned was just what else is going on within the areas that I claim to be interested in, but that I'd never heard of because I had done research. And when you do research, you're so focused on that, that small set of things that you're really pursuing. And so just learning about what's adjacent to your field, or what are those other ways, if I do nanostructures and I have more of a physics materials background, why do we care about that from an environmental health and safety perspective? Or why do we care about that, for, what economic questions are going to be asked? So a lot of the problems that we answer, the technical answers have been solved. Those are not the challenging parts. The challenging parts are the social component of it, or the economic component of it, or putting both of those together, the political component of it. And so being sensitive to those things, it's very easy to come in and actually, when we had at the end of the year, fellows give sort of presentations about what they've learned. And one of the ones my year was a guy had put up a chart that said, before I started the fellowship, here's what I thought, here's a pie chart of what I thought all of the problems in the world, what do we need to solve them? And 75% was the technical part. We need to solve the technical part. And then the other 25 was like social, and then a sliver of political. And he's like, okay, so after the fellowship, I have learned that 10% at most is the technical part of the challenge. 90% is coordinating and economics and policy and all of these sorts of things. And so it's very easy when you're a scientist or engineer to think that the things you care about must be the hardest things to do. And just sort of getting a perspective outside of that is very important. I don't know, I think that's only 2, but I've talked enough. You can go.
I think I remember that presentation. That was a great presentation.
Yeah, I think that wraps it up really well. What I had jotted down, it was almost the same thing that I thought of, was the varying role of science in government. So if you are at a science funding agency such as NIH or NSF, science rules. But once you begin to move over to more, policy heavy organizations such as the State Department or in Congress, science is all but one voice, and it may or may not be valued. So it is learning how to bring science appropriately into decisions, into programming, but also learning how to position the science or the technical information into a way that is digestible to drive change. And also, Eric, you had mentioned, economics. When I was at the State Department, everything was, whether we were talking about health issues, science issues, from an international perspective in particular, they all went through an economic lens. So I have that skill forever now. When I think about an issue, I'm automatically thinking about what is the impact from an economic standpoint. The other piece is just really understanding, you get to look behind the curtain, right? And see what Oz is up to, and or the Wizard of Oz. So you get to see what the wizard is up to or not. you really learn how government works. And, the punchline to that is that it does actually work. And that is to thanks of the legions of civil servants that know the system inside and out. And when a mandate comes down from the White House or Congress and the executive branch has to respond, it's tremendous how many people get together. And just as Eric said, it's all about collaboration, coordinating, bringing all the right minds together in the room to drive consensus to develop policy. And so you learn not only how that soup is made, but where science fits in or doesn't fit in different elements of that. And on the congressional side, that's much more the wild, wild west. That's where they're writing legislation. While I didn't have an opportunity to work there, you're working for your representative or your senator or your committee, and they have much more freedom than the executive branch does in kind of driving and developing the policy. So it kind of thinking about, as you think about which branches you want to apply to or which part of the program you want to apply to, or even as you're getting down through, if you're going through the interviews, it's learning what the different types of policy spaces are like, and where your people are at. Where's your community? Who do you want to be with other experts to focus on the technical to drive policy for science? Or do you want to be the only scientist in the room and have to really run with a different pack? And both of those have their own unique challenges. So there's so much to learn. I couldn't bring it down to 3 either.
No, that's fine. I think both of those are, truly valuable anyway. So we have 2 questions from the audience, from viewers. One is a follow-up to the letters of recommendation question, which is it advantageous to tailor the letters for executive versus legislative? I'll read it to you. Is there an advantage to tailoring the letters to executive versus legislative? As a program manager, I say absolutely. You want to, have 2, separate recommendation letters, explaining, who you are for each. But I'll let the panelists answer that question. So Diane, since
go ahead.
I think it's, and try not to overthink it. I think it comes from a personal perspective. If you're interested in the legislative congressional fellowship, then you're going to need to be, I'm trying to think how you can kind of describe the different personalities. It's very fast paced. It's very, the more policy heavy an office is, the more reactive it is. So if you're in a program planning office, you have some time to think and plan, and you might be able to predict what your next week's going to look like. You get into a policy heavy environment, such as Congress, or when I was at the State Department, and it's just, there's what you're trying to do in the long term, but it's also what just happened in the news that day. And so if you want to be applying for the congressional fellowship, or then it's skills of, being able to work in a fast-paced environment, being proactive, but then there are some characteristics that carry over to all branches, which is being a team player, being an excellent communicator, and, an eager learner, because in both places you're going to be, it's like you're dropped onto, you're dropped onto an island that as Eric mentioned, when you first get in there, it's like, okay, I need somebody to show me the ropes here. So always being willing to learn. You may know your scientific expertise, but there's always that initial learning curve when you come into the fellowship. So I don't know I hope that answers the question about the letter.
Yeah, and also.
And so I'm sorry, Eric. Since we are 5 minutes We have about 5 minutes. And so I want to sort of wrap up our conversation. And so, so really quickly, thank you. Thank you again for serving as panelists today. And so do you guys have any parting advice to anyone who is interested in becoming a fellow? So Eric, I'll let you start this one.
Yeah, geez, okay. Have people proofread your application. If you can get a hold of any alumni or current fellows, send it to them to look at when you have it in a polished state. To sort of, if there's any other details that would be helpful to just push over the edge there. If you're applying to professional society congressional fellowships, they sometimes have different sort of things they want from their fellow than what AAAS has. So read those very carefully, and definitely in your application letters, or in your application letters and your recommendation letters, make sure that you refer to the right society if you're applying to more than one. Just some advice from what I've heard from other people. Definitely be careful and know what they're looking for, because what they're looking for in a fellow is not always exactly the same as what AAAS is for their fellows. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, just I think I took a month in September where most of what I did was just kind of every day look at my application, read through it, touch it up. You may not have to go that far, but don't overthink it, but also don't underprepare it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, make sure when you're writing your personal statement, or your recommender is submitting their submitting their letter on your behalf, make sure it is the right program area or the right fellowship. Yeah.
You don't Diane, have very much room in those personal statements. They're not very long, and so you need to communicate a lot of information in a very short space. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess, yep, that would be my advice.
Thank you, Eric. Diane, any parting advice for someone interested in the fellowships?
Sure. I would absolutely endorse everything that Eric said. And then in thinking about the application, it's a balance between expressing why you're interested in coming to working in policy, but also conveying that you are open to learning about what the opportunities are, so that you do not accidentally, in conveying your enthusiasm about a particular issue that you may be interested in, have someone overlook you because they think, oh, well, they're only interested in that, and I don't know how many placements we have in that, or our office doesn't do that. You want to strike that tone of, these are the things I'm interested in, but I want to broaden my my view, and be genuine. Seek out alumni, to talk to. I'm always happy to talk to applicants as they're preparing. If I can give you any more advice than I already have, but talk with other alumni and hear from them. And I just encourage you to apply. It's the best thing you can do. I can't say enough good things about it, and I swear I'm not on the AAAS payroll. It's just, some of my best friends are still from the fellowship program, and it's a cohort that just never ends. And no matter where you go, where you move to, it's a tremendous experience. So I say go for it and have a blast. Just apply, and come to Washington.
Well, guys, thank you so much. Thank you to the viewers for, listening to our panelists. Join us in a few weeks, September 12th at 3 p.m., where we go take a deeper dive into the STPF application and interview process. So I highly recommend you joining us there. And then visit the fellowship website for future live chats. And that's where you can learn more about the application process. So thank you so much again for participating and for listening to our panelists today. Have a great afternoon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.